Hello. About a month ago, I released Venom version 2.11.1, and about 2 weeks ago, it actually hit the library. And I never released a change log or an announcement or any kind of demo video, and I think it's time I remedy that. So this is going to be, there's no new modules in this release. It's just enhancements, mostly to VCO unit and VCO Lab to improve the sound quality. And this is going to be a very technical, dry demo, nothing musical. Hopefully, it's interesting and demonstrates some important concepts. So the first thing I want to talk about is probably the biggest change, and that's improving the saw wave and the square wave, especially in higher frequencies. So here we have VCO unit with a square wave, pretty high pitch, and I've got the amplitude plot all the way down to -120. I mean, if I go to -60, it's very clean looking, right? So all that stuff is very low amplitude. All those extra peaks down there. If I go and look at the context menu, there are some new options, and the one I want to talk about first is this disable DPW anti-aliased. And if I do that, hopefully you can hear it. You can definitely see it on the spectrum analyzer there, where we got a lot of low amplitude aliasing that wasn't there before. And if you're in a quiet room or you've got some headphones, you should be able to hear that. And if I move the frequency, I think you'll really hear it. So that's what the saw wave and that's the square wave, and the saw wave does the same thing. And if I turn the DPW aliasing back on, it's much cleaner. So that it only works if at higher frequencies. Due to limitations of floating point arithmetic, this technique does not work at low frequencies. So if I start bringing the frequency down, you can still see I'll call it a noise floor, but really it's just aliasing. It's still pretty good. And then all of a sudden you see it jump up significantly. It doesn't matter when we're at these low frequencies where we're not able to do the DPW anti-aliasing technique. You can't, human ears can't pick up that extra aliasing low amplitude noise there. The other limitation is, it doesn't have any impact on triangle or sine. It only works with saw and square. It doesn't work with square or triangle with certain shapes. It doesn't work with, in the square, it doesn't work with the morphing. You can see that as you morph, it doesn't. Let's turn this up. Right. Enabled or disabled makes no difference. Hopefully in the future, I can. I might be able to implement it. I wasn't able to implement it with the morphing at this first release, and it may stay this way. The other thing, with the saw, it doesn't work with. Let's see. I'm sorry. We go to If we have it enabled, that's great. It works with the log exponential shaping, works with the J curve. It works with S curve, but it does not work with any of the rectify modes. You can see the aliasing jump up in amplitude, and it does not work with normalized rectify, and it does not work with morphing, just like the square doesn't work. That's so. If you're using rectify or any of the morph modes, that's a reason perhaps to have higher oversampling if you're going up in upper frequencies to try to mitigate and minimize. But if you're in lower frequencies, if we go back to here, even if I turn the oversampling off, I can go pretty high, and I don't hear aliasing. So you probably, if it's just a clean, simple saw wave or a simple square wave without any modulation, you probably don't need any oversampling. But if you're adding phase modulation or linear FM or exponential FM or hard sync, soft sync, any kind of modulation like that, it's worth still having. It still helps to add at least some amount of oversampling. You just might not need as much as you would without the DPW anti-aliasing. All right, I think that's enough about that. Oh, I should, that's with it on. Let's disable this. Now, if we turn off the anti-aliasing with the DPW off. Oops, I'm sorry, that was off. There we go. With the aliasing, anti-aliasing, the oversampling off, it's really pretty bad. And re-enabling it works pretty well. All right. Enough on that one. There is one other improvement, at least theoretically, to the sound, and that's let's turn this back up. You can see the oversampling we have, it's cutting off the high frequencies, and well, oversampling computes the wave at a higher sample rate than the actual VCV rack is running, and then it filters out high frequencies that are above the Nyquist frequency, so that when you bring the sample rate back down, you don't get the aliasing. And the steeper the slope, it uses a low-pass filter, and the steeper the slope, the better off, the better it removes the aliasing. And I made an improvement. It used to be oversample quality. It used to be 6th order. So if you look at this profile, this a nice slope, and about, what is this frequency here? I'm running at 48K sample rate, and about 18, 19 is where the cutoff is, and it comes down. If I go to the behavior I used to have, I used to use a 6th order low-pass filter, and then it's around 12K, and it's a shallower cutoff. So it sacrifices some of the high frequencies that should be there. I can't hear the difference, but maybe some young people with good fresh ears can hear some of those higher frequencies. Maybe it sounds a little crisper, a little brighter. Don't know, but definitely theoretically, it's better to have the steeper slope. So whether or not it makes a difference, I've got the option now to go back to the old behavior or 8th or 10th order. And this oversample filter option is available with every module that has any form of oversampling. Reformation, right? It has oversampling, and it's got the oversample filter quality option. And Mix 4 doesn't have, it's not an obvious oversampling capability, but if you look at the clipping options, it's got soft oversampled clipping, two of those. So both of those use oversampling. So indeed, Mix 4 has oversample filter quality. So any module with any form of oversampling has that option. The by default, anytime you place a module with this version 2.11.1 or above, the DPW anti-aliasing is enabled, and it's using a 10th order filter for oversampling. If you have an old patch, then the VCO Lab and VCO unit default to DPW anti-aliasing disabled, so that you don't change the behavior of old patches. And likewise, any module, old patch with a module that has a Venom module that has oversampling, it defaults to 6th order low pass filter. So I told you this was going to be dry, right? But it's kind of interesting. What can we do? Where does this have an impact? Here, I am attempting to do some phase distortion synthesis with VCO, this right VCO unit. It's in 0 hertz carrier mode, and then I got another VCO unit running at audio rates, driving the phase. So if I turn the attenuator to 0, right, at 0 hertz carrier mode, there's no signal. And to get the cleanest phase driven signal, you want to set that to 40%. And we've got our sine wave, and the green trace is the phasor. We've got our sine wave, and we can use the Hetrick shaper. Wait, what is it? Oops. Let's put that. There we go. We can use the Hetrick shaper to do some phase distortion. But that's an ugly sine. It's got those noisy peaks, those 2 peaks that we don't want. And that is a byproduct of oversampling, actually. It turns out that the phasor cannot have any anti-aliasing applied to it. So if I turn off the oversampling, that gets rid of some of the... In fact, let me do it this way. I'll start with just turning off oversampling on the VCO unit, and that gets rid of one of the peaks. If I turn off the oversampling of the phasor, that almost gets rid of the peak, and then we have to go in and disable the new feature, the DPW anti-aliasing. Turn that off. Now we've got a nice, clean sine, and I can do the phase distortion, and it's very nice. However, if we bring this up high, well, especially if we're doing something other than a sine. If we do a square, say, we're going to get a bunch of aliasing because we've disabled the oversampling on the 0 hertz carrier side. Well, it turns out you don't have to completely disable it. I can turn this back on, right? And that reinstantiate, you see the spikes coming in, but I can disable, there's oversampling or upsampling of the phase signal coming in. So there's a context menu on the port where I can disable oversampling. And now we got rid of that spike. And now you can see that we've got that, I forgot what that's, the Gibbs effect or whatever. That's actually anti-aliasing working. So still not great because the phasor is not anti-aliased, but it's better. Or it doesn't have any anti-aliasing at all. No oversampling, no DPW. But it's at least it's better than if we didn't have the oversampling on the 0 hertz carrier module. What more do I want to say about that? So if you want to use VCO unit or VCO Lab to do phase distortion, then just remember, make sure that there's no anti-aliasing on your phasor. You could use an LFO instead of an audio rate, but then we don't have to. But even there, you still have to worry about setting the and you can bring this up to audio frequencies, but it's a limit to how high you can go. You still have to worry a bit about the disabling the oversampling of the phase port. All right, enough on that. What else? I want to talk about hard and soft sync, and a concept. I saw a video years ago that Jakub Ciupinski put out called talking about windowed sync. So if you have, right now we have a sine wave and got the VCO unit with this sine, and we have VCO Lab. Whoa. Whoops. Wrong thing. Hard sync. There we go. If we change the frequency, so now we've got the VCO Lab syncing the VCO unit. We've got the classic sync sound. But as Jakub pointed out in his video, it's a harsh sine's supposed to be a nice smooth tone, smooth timbre, and it's just got that buzzing tone that comes in and out as you change the frequency, and that's more than likely not desired. Maybe it is, but I think a lot of people don't want that. And so he talked about how you can use a windowed sync function where you, when you at the point at which the sync occurs, you temporarily use a VCA to dampen the signal down to 0, so you don't hear that buzz. And I'll put a link to in the description for the video where he talks about this technique. He used ring modulation to set up the signal, but with something like VCO Lab, it's got multiple waveforms, and they can be used, right? You got the square doing the syncing, but we can use another waveform for our envelope to silence at the sync point. So let's use sine, and if we look at that, this will start. This is going to be the we kind of work our way to the optimal solution here. You can see that at the sync point, the sine crosses 0. So if we use the sine and put that at the VCA, or the level for the VCO unit, and then turn this off, set that level to 0, and then put the amplitude all the way up. And why is that? It's very much attenuated, but we've got a at the port, we've got the bipolar, the VCA unity set to 5 volts. That right now that's disabled, so right now it takes 10 volts to get full amplitude. If we set that to 5 volt unity, we at least have our 10 volt peak to peak. And yes, indeed, we have a nice smooth sync, but it's like less than 50% duty cycle where we're actually getting the wave through. We can do better than that. So what we can do is looking at the sine wave again, we can make it unipolar. And now you can see that the sync point is not occurring at 0, but we can change the phase of the sine. And it just so happens it's a nice mathematical 90 degree shift, minus 90. And now we've got the sync at the 0 point of the unipolar sine wave. So if we put that back to the level, set this back to 0. And let me do a little aside here. I want to talk about probably an underused feature. Right now, the default for level, like if I double click this, it goes to 100%. But let's say, I'm going back and forth between 0 and 100%, and I want to be able to double click and go to 0. Just once, I need to set it to 0. And then I can right mouse click on the knob and set the default to the current value, which is 0. So now if I can change it anything I want, double click, and it goes to 0. So every control in a Venom plugin, you have that capability, and that can be really handy, especially for in a performance setting where you can set your knob to the value that you want, and then modify the knob and get back quickly. But anyway, set the level to 0, and then turn the attenuation up all the way. I want to set the unity back to 10 volts. It's unipolar. So now we've got our 10 volt peak to peak like we should have. This is much better, right? And it's nice and nice smooth sync. But we can do better yet, because we have shaping options for the sine wave. And it turns out we can do put it on J shape, and then, in fact, let's put this here. Again, put this up. Look what happens when I pump. It's almost like saturation. So if I use that now, that's pretty good. We've really preserved most of the wave, and it's nice and smooth. You might just a slight buzz. You can back this off a little bit, get it to where you want it. I like it about there. So you don't have to use ring modulation. You can just use VCO Lab. You can probably do this with some other VCOs that have multiple waveforms. They might not have the ability to change the phase relationship between the square and the sine wave, and they're probably not going to have the shaping that built in that allows you to preserve as much of the signal as we can. So that is that's working with a square wave as the sync signal. Why, no reason not to use anything else. But there's one other thing I want to demonstrate, a new feature of VCO Lab. And to do that, I'm going to go ahead and use triangle as my sync. And notice that the buzz is back. And that is because if we look at the we'll get there. Finally. Let's bring the frequency down, a little easier to see. You can see what's going on. The reset point is at around 2 volts. And that is because the threshold at which the sync is recognized is at 2 volts. It's a Schmidt trigger. 2 volts it triggers, and then it has to drop down to 0.2 volts to reset so that it can trigger again. And I chose those thresholds so that it works. The sync works with both unipolar and bipolar waveforms. So what we can the new feature of VCO unit is you can set the trigger threshold for the sync to be 0 volts. And now you can see that it's at the 0 crossing point again. So if we set this back to 0, and we have our nice smooth sync again, even though we're not using a square wave. The reason the square wave works, regardless of which frequency, is it's pretty much a vertical jump in, so that it's still going to be hitting, whether it's 0 or 2, it makes no difference. It takes place at the same time. But something like a triangle, if you want to be able to have the nice simple, 90-degree phase relationship, you want to have it trigger at 0 volts at the crossing point. By the way, this works nicely not only for hard sync, it also works with soft sync. If we didn't have the windowed sync, still got that buzz. So, okay, those are all the features. Those are the main new features that I implemented for version 2.11.1. There's one more thing I want to talk about, kind of esoteric usage of VCO Lab and VCO unit, especially VCO Lab, optimizing for CPU usage. Here I've got a nice, interesting drone, and if we turn on CPU usage monitoring, almost 8% usage. That's pretty high. And I've designed by default VCO Lab and VCO unit. I configure them by default to try to give the best sound I can possibly give. So I'm activating oversampling as much as possible, and the DPW anti-aliasing now with this version. But you don't really, there's oversampling that takes place at all of these. Before I talk about the oversampling, if we look, we're using the sine. That's in the mix. We're using the triangle. It's actually not going to the mix, but it's being used to modulate the phase of the sine. So those are two waveforms that we're using. And then the square is also a bit of that's going into the mix. But this saw wave, we're not using it at all. But it takes CPU to compute. And right now, because this is it's using this level assignment, it's set to add it to the mix. It doesn't care that it's at 0. It's still wasting energy, wasting CPU cycles to compute the saw wave. So one way I can reduce CPU usage a little bit in this particular case is just set the level assignment to the saw output, because I'm not using the output of the saw, and I'm not using it in the mix. Now it jumped from 7.8, 7.9 down to 7.2. So there's some improvement in CPU usage right there. So something to keep in mind. Just you can play with the level assignments depending on the context of what you're using. You might be able to use the level assignments to minimize so that it doesn't bother computing waveforms that you don't need. Now with oversampling, all this modulation to get the best sound in all scenarios, right? We VCO Lab and VCO Unit, for the modulation, it upsamples to the same rate as the oversampling that you're using. And if you're doing low frequency modulation, there's absolutely no reason to bother doing the upsampling. And almost all of this modulation is low frequency. The only exception is the phase modulation, the triangle to here. So what we can do is disable the oversampling at each of these modulation ports that don't need it. So I'll disable it here, disable it here, disable it here, and here, and here, and here. And did I disable it? And here. So now we're down to 4.6. Remember we started at 7.8, 7.9, and 4.6. Not quite 50% reduction, but still pretty significant. I could. Now it turns out this is a bass drone, and generally, if when you're dealing with bass tones, you probably don't need oversampling. So let's try what happens if I disable the oversampling, that one as well, down to 4.3. Well, do we need any oversampling at all? This is a bass, right? So let's just turn the oversampling off entirely. It's down to 1.8, 1.7. I can't hear the difference. So, if we go up high enough, that's sounding pretty suspect. So if we turn the oversampling back on, and also enable oversampling of the phase modulation at audio rates, there, now we got a nice clean signal. But chances are you're not going to be doing this at this high frequency. So yeah, all this anti-aliasing techniques are available to get the cleanest sound, but oftentimes you don't need that. It's great to have the options, but oftentimes you don't need it. So don't be afraid to experiment and just find out what works best in your application, and you can have the potential for saving a significant amount of CPU. So that's all I had. Again, pretty dry, but hopefully that these are useful things if you're using the Venom plugin to be able to get the best results possible. Oh, and if you're doing a simple patch, you don't even have to worry about it, right? If you're not bumping up against CPU limits, just let it go. You have to use all the CPU at once. But when you're bumping up the limits, it's good to have options to try to use the minimum CPU possible, so you can make bigger patches. So I hope this was interesting. Hope you have fun with Venom, and until next time, I'll see you later. Bye.